Hi everyone, it's Kieran from Proteus Astrology, and it's August, and we're in the middle of 2021. So with the chaos in the world right now, it feels a little bit like we are the frogs being boiled slowly in the cauldron. But I wanted to pick one theme among many and zero in on that, and I think many others have talked about it, so I just want to add my take on this. So Uranus in Taurus and Saturn in Aquarius have been prominent throughout 2021, and don't we know it? The battle is being shoved in our faces. And just briefly, Uranus helps to blast away the clutter of ideas that were clogging the collective mind, all the tired old beliefs, social, institutional, political, or cultural, and digs out where the rot has set in, where the mass psychosis as well, the Wetiko, if you know about that, operates subliminally, looping us back forever and dooming us to repeat the mistakes, the twisted mistakes of history. We get locked in. If you want to know more about Wetiko, just please do look up that concept. It's about a mass psychosis. And Saturn, on the other hand, bolsters the old guard, the consensus, the conventions, the institutions. It's the devil you know, rather than the one you don't, and it portrays itself as the safe option, but traps you in chains and invites you to nicely abandon all your hard-earned liberties. So Uranus, this is a wonderful engraving by Karl Friedrich Schinkel of Uranus, showing perhaps the more heavenly side of Uranus. Is here to install new and futuristic software in the mental DNA. He helps to kick out all the detritus that has been piling up for decades. Those ideas can be gone in a nanosecond, in fact. It probably already has zapped some mango belief that you had, and now you need to catch your breath and figure out what just happened. So that's where we can take stock a bit when Uranus goes retrograde on August the 19th, which is tomorrow. But this is a much misunderstood planet. He's the breakthrough planet, the destroyer archetype, the punk, the rebel, the anarchist, the revolutionary thinker. And if you look around, you may be being triggered to activate this archetype. But clearly he's much more than just that. Uranus frees energy, and I think brings instant clear-sighted vision that makes way for all the fresh and creative. It does not always have the human touch unless it's softened by Venus, Jupiter, or the moon, or some other personal aspect. But it is the higher octave of Mercury, so it brings that genius edge to the trickster. But it cannot be ignored, that's for sure. And many of you will be familiar with Uranian energy. And I'm speaking now to all the cooks, the eccentrics, the utopians, the activists, all you justice warriors, geeks, wayward types, and those who are electrically charged up just because they have a higher vibrational nervous system. And anyone who chooses to identify with the maverick, who is scapegoated as well, as Chiron also does that. And let's not forget the astrologers who also thrive under a Uranian flag. I add here the Muse asteroid Urania as a sister spirit to Uranus. So we're living through one of the most Uranian periods of recent years. And we're getting his downloads, maybe even while we sleep. And so from tomorrow, the 19th, he stations retrograde at 14 degrees of Taurus. So it's time to slow down a bit, perhaps, and take stock of how far we've come this year, how fast it's been, especially if you've been among those who've resisted the onslaught of the media hyperbole, and if you've had the discernment to pick your way through the quagmire of information, misinformation, and disinformation. Good for you. If so, you are doing your Joseph Campbell adventure calls, and you responded, but now perhaps you're being asked to absorb what superpower you have gained in order to take back to the tribe and deliver. So find out which house Uranus resides in your chart. You can do that on astro.com, or if you have got your chart already, just check where it is. Check also for where Saturn is. And that's where it will be operating. So it could be directly through your body, through your communications, your money area, your creativity, relationships, beliefs, career, and so on. And that's where you'll feel the call of the wild, some kind of electrification of those areas. And where your Saturn is will locate the place of your biggest fear, and also the place of the area where you feel you need to be safe, or you have you need to impose some kind of structure. So we can see here some keywords for Uranus and some keywords for Saturn, and we're talking about this square that's happening 3 times this year. And so this is not necessarily for those, I mean, I'm focusing more on the Uranian aspect, really. So it's not just those who have Sun in Aquarius who might also be feeling this, because Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, but it's anyone who has an outer planet edginess, and that could also be Neptune and Pluto. Because those planets are, especially if they're prominent on the angles. If that happens to be Uranus in your case, and that's true for me, you'll know who you are by never fitting in with any groups or conforming to the herd mentality. You might have unusual ideas, or quite simply be never understood by anyone, and you might even be used to that by now. So if Uranus conjuncts the Sun or the Moon or a personal planet, or is on one of your angles, it can cause direct havoc with the primary areas of life, the way you relate to everyone, basically, and to relate to your life. And you may never get quite used to it, of being jolted out of your habitual by its disruptive blast, as it can derail and discombobulate all your plans. If it's Saturn that's marked you, on the other hand, and we're talking generally here, I mean, there are always other factors in a chart that you have to look at. You may side more vigorously with the opposite tendency, which is the traditional, the government norms, conventional attitudes that do not rock the boat, that align more with peer pressure, censorship, segregation even, and the wish that everyone was fully compliant, as the idea of freedom might frighten you somehow to think that coercion is a good thing. And at the core of that might just be the fear not of death, I think, real or imagined death or illness, but the fear of life itself, because that's what Freud called the death wish, which is fundamentally anti-life and has quite a potent effect in life without people realizing. But on top of that, I think there's some skullduggery going on. And people who are empaths can feel this acutely. Anyone who's a psychic will know about all this. Pluto is still at 24 degrees of Capricorn, chipping away at the remaining monolithic institutions, showing their corruption, and that there's a deception on a colossal scale. And that, I think, comes from the Neptune in Pisces, which is bending reality into multiple forms. Even the so-called variants, it's all getting confusing, that go from alpha to omega, starting with delta. But it's all smoke and mirrors, and nothing is where that's concerned, nothing is as true as it appears to be, even when we peel off all the layers. So notice how great the role the internet, that would be associated with Uranus, has played in the controlling of perceptions of people by selective accessibility of information. And on top of that, if you think of it as a cocktail, Aries is in the mix, as she is the rebel rouser in Aries and has been there for decades. She's been squaring off to Pluto. So throughout this year, that's ramping up the pressure and tension. And Aries speaks to the disenfranchised people, or the people who are incapable of being kept down. She will get her revenge at whatever cost. So this is another image of Uranus, but this is in the form of Prometheus, so I'll just explain that. So Uranus is basically moving very little during this time, so we can take stock of which part of the vanguard we occupy. And it wasn't just Richard Tarnas that noted that Uranus, as known in Greek mythology, doesn't really have the right story. And he said it was more like Prometheus than the old Titan Urania. But the one interesting fact about Urania was that the juices from his castration did at least foment the goddess Venus. So we have him to thank for that. But I think the Prometheus idea has borne this out, and there seems to be a lot of truth to it. The name Uranus has remained, however, which is okay. Some people argue that the original name should stick. Maybe that's true. But the story of Prometheus definitely has something to add. So he brought fire from the gods to give to the people, even if that fire is advanced technologies. But for that he was severely punished and chained by Vulcan, who was the husband of Venus, or Aphrodite, and was doomed to have his liver eaten out daily by a vulture. So Zeus stood for the tyranny in that story, taking the role of Saturn in the current 2021 story. And Prometheus was heralded by poets Byron and Shelley as a symbol of the rebellious spirit. But it was Mary Shelley who highlighted the shadowy aspects of Prometheus as an aberration of the natural order in Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus, a book which is so famous it needs no introduction. And that relates to the current trend for transhumanism. And that's interesting because Prometheus has also had the gift of forethought or foresight. Unlike his brother Epimetheus, whose gift was hindsight. And so Mary Shelley had some foresight there. And this is a perfect theme during the Uranus retrograde, as somehow during the retrograde, Prometheus can become somewhat more like his brother Epimetheus, just for a while. So retreating into your interior space is always a good thing, and to find that minimal place of grounding, whether it be meditation, walking, doing yoga, eating quality food, tending your plants or gardens, or just sitting still and taking a moment to breathe. This can help absorb the electricity that seems to be coming upon us at the moment. There are a lot of major players like Saturn, Neptune and Pluto are already retrograde, so it's just adding another major player. But we're looking towards October to see that there would be a landslide move forward, I think, when all of these planets go forward again. So we get Mercury going direct in early October. Pluto goes direct on the 7th of October, Saturn on the 12th, and Mercury and Jupiter go forward on the 18th of October. So I think a lot of the current tension is building up to that, and there will be a massive unplugging or forward movement around the middle of October. But it could go either way, towards more freedom or more oppression. So I think that it's a good time to just reflect on all the new knowledge that you have, not in a sense of backtracking, just to absorb the deeper meaning of it, because it's been so rapid. There have been so many protests around the world that have escalated to crisis point. Push has come to shove, and this square has really shown us that these two, when they go in a wrestling match, it's a real standoff. I mean, those who argue on the side of safety, like Saturn, whether real or not, they want to impose rules on individuals and remove human rights for the sake of the whole, or for the collective. So I don't know where you stand on this. But, the question is, do the ends justify the means? In Orwell's Animal Farm, they did just that. They created a dysfunctional utopian scenario. They overtook the farmer's house. This is all the animals. But they created a situation where some are more equal than others. And I'm not sure that is the ideal to search for. I think it's pushing people into a kind of, you can feel it, a kind of splitting of the fabric of society. People are being polarized against each other, orchestrated by the media. And it's wise to not get sucked into that, but it may serve the purpose of sharpening up your intuition, heightening your responses, or making you more intensely alive and awake to what is going on, which is all very Uranian. So when I think of the archetype of the Uranian embodied in a human, then I immediately think of Patrick McGoohan. He was an actor from the 1960s and 70s. He said that the idea for The Prisoner, which was his famous TV program, started out of boredom. He was doing a series called The Danger Man, and he just got tired of it because it became repetitious, and he said it was stereotyping. He actually refused the role of James Bond because he thought that was stereotypical too. So he created his own series. He said that people were prisoners of conditioning. And then the village, which is the setting for the series, The Prisoner, is based on Portmeirion in North Wales. And you can visit there, and it's quite amazing. And in this village, in the story, there are forces, Saturn, you could call them, trying to destroy the individual, to break his spirit, which is Uranus. So McGoohan himself played the character of Number 6, the one rebel agent they can't break. And he's forever mystified by where he is, why he's there, and attempts to escape the village, which represents the matrix in which we're all enmeshed. Portmeirion, incidentally, is an architectural conceit where nothing is what it seems. Much like in the Truman Show, if you have ever seen that, another intriguing film, where everything looks real on the surface. So Portmeirion is the perfect backdrop for The Prisoner because it's all artificially constructed. The Prisoner has achieved cult status now, and for good reason, because it's multivalent and people endlessly see in it what they're able to see. But I think it expresses the plight of Uranus, being trapped in the world and always wanting to break free. Because having your liver eaten out every day isn't much fun. Uranus tries to kick his way out of the box that Saturn constructs for us to feel safe. And that village is all around us. But it's being directed now towards the concept of the smart city, into which we all are being herded or corralled, and in not too distant future. So that's why I feel that holding on to the very best of the archetype of Uranus is extremely important, as to lose that facet of yourself might be to lose your spark, your ultimate spirit. So McGoohan was an interesting character. He was a Pisces, born March 19th, 1928. But with a prominent Uranus. Now, that was conjunct his sun, though in the adjacent sign are 3 degrees of Aries, so cross signs. He has the moon in Aquarius, and Aquarius is his ascendant. So triple Aquarius, you could say. And both these areas are ruled by Uranus. So, he demonstrated that. He was an incredibly inventive and inspirational writer. That's guaranteed. I think if you look at the chart there, I won't go into too much detail, but Mercury and Venus conjunct, is a blessing for a writer. He was also very vocal about everything. So Mars and Aquarius there, you can see that. He would be the spokesperson for anything new. He refused to dumb down. And he really enjoyed the controversy, and that was his intention. He loved it when people disagreed about what the prisoner meant. People said the prisoner was ahead of its time, and that it can still puncture a hole in people's box view of the world half a century later. So this matches the Promethean as the god of foresight, who was able to see around the corner into the future. So when McGoohan was asked what he thought the problem of the world really was, he said that it was advancing technology that was going too fast at a pace that people couldn't absorb. And he knew that we would need time to take it all in and to understand things emotionally as well. So that's what the retrograde asks us to do, to allow emotions to catch up and integrate the new knowledge into a whole approach, or it could go easily off balance. And you see there that his Uranus even trines his MC, so which is like fire, from fire to the firebrand, from its position in Aries to his MC in Sagittarius, the other fire sign. And I think he embodied that spirit so well. Fiery nature. And McGoohan was also a man of principle, though, and he even considered becoming a Catholic priest. He tended to stick to his guns and get his way with TV producers. He was even called a moral secret agent, which is a kind of paradox, if any secret agent can ever be moral. But he played John Drake in The Prisoner and Agent Number 6 with such intensity and charm, people noticed his compelling screen presence. So I looked to that Pluto in the 5th house, which would channel that magnetism into his creative work, and that comes across on screen and in his transformative ideas. Remember that information, which is what number 1 is always seeking out of all the people in the village, can be pronounced information, and that relates to the development of the self. He later on would write some of the series of the disheveled detective Columbo, played by Peter Falk, and he played King Edward I in Braveheart, but I think in The Prisoner he excelled, as it was basically the Patrick McGoohan show. So on the other side of freedom is this wish to conform to society, or to use a cause to force people to conform and stamp out any individuality or dissent. Saturn, not always, loves to keep you firmly in place as just another brick in the wall, or to become a man of steel like Josef Stalin. Here's another living archetype of the worst side of Saturn. He was a Sagittarian, born in 1878, and widely regarded as one of the most formidable tyrants of the 20th century, because the death toll at his door is much larger than anything Hitler achieved. Yet he was a small man, only 5 feet 4 inches, which may account for the overcompensation, the power hungriness. And he has Saturn conjunct his ascendant in Pisces, and it's square to the sun. So that looks like a bit of trouble. But remember, any chart doesn't necessarily manifest negative aspects. It really depends on the native themselves, what they manifest. But so this portrait here reveals quite a Saturnian look. He's very stern facial features, trying to embody power and authority. The style of propaganda then would lionize him, so they would be overemphasizing those features. But you can look at his Pluto in Taurus, which is opposite his Mars in Scorpio. So there's a lot of tension in that opposition, and that's palpable in the way that he ruthlessly eliminated enemies, often setting them up, tricking them into confessions. It's not exactly a T-square with Saturn there, but it's still locked in a triangle configuration. And he basically saw violence and terror as tools for progress. So there's no doubt that he was a monster, and one report states that he was an amoral psychopath and paranoid with a gangster's mentality. Stalin eliminated anyone and everyone who was a threat to his power, including and especially former allies. He had absolutely no regard for the sanctity of human life. So estimates of the deaths he was responsible for amount to around 40 million. And he did this through executions, wars, controlled famines, gulags, forced slavery, extortion, prostitution rackets, and mass displacements. All probably driven by an intense paranoia and a fear of being snubbed by those of greater intellect. This is not all that Saturn is about, but just in this particular case, it stands out that Saturn is there on the ascendant. And it's not to malign Saturn either. Saturn can be constructive, solid, resourceful, stoical, and give the best results when we feel we have really achieved something of worth. It's just that these qualities don't have much appeal at first, but they turn out to be beneficial in the end, and only after a lot of hard graft. And Stalin definitely worked constantly and tirelessly to create his image and to establish his power, absolute power in this case. Saturn is the master builder if you work well with him, but in Stalin you get the dysfunctional mode of Saturn. Even Churchill saw the Wolverine features in him and said that he looked like a wolf. And Stalin was actually haunted by prowling wolves from an earlier experience where he was nearly starving, but the wolves were after all any available food nearby. So there is an off tone here with that Saturn in Pisces. It somehow went badly off the scales till he became a psychopathic despot drunk on power, perhaps not able to see the reality. Stalin once said also that the death of one man is a tragedy, but the death of 1,000,000 is a statistic, which is very telling, as it appears to be an adage that underscores our current addiction for seeing a deathometer on the news media. But in 2021, it's now with a splattering of Neptunian deception. Neptune, remember, is still mid-voyage in Pisces and still, I think, corroding any certainties, adding murkiness to the model. To this type of aspect, we've also got a malignant Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn who wants to impose power. And in the end, that's, as I said, total power, absolute power. And we see that also perhaps in the charts of Mao Zedong, who was a Capricorn, and Hitler, a Taurus, who both had Saturn conjunct their MCs. So that's interesting. And communists and fascists both believed in doing whatever is necessary regardless of the consequences. And that usually involved mass murder. And Stalinism is still alive wherever that philosophy is the hidden playbook. So I wonder what would happen if we put Stalin in the same room with Patrick McGoohan. And definitely sparks would fly, maybe the execution squad would be ordered, and agent number 6 would realize who is the number 1. And that might surprise us if it is not Stalin, who pretends to be the number 1. So in the final episode of The Prisoner, just to wrap up with this, is that when all the layers are peeled back on who was number 1, it first shows a monkey's face, and then it peels back to reveal the face of Agent 6 himself, which was Patrick McGoohan. So that makes me think about a famous quote by Blake, which is, "The iron hand crushed the tyrant's head and became the tyrant in his stead." Because our world is a mirror, and it points to the shadow inside that we fail to integrate. But as co-rulers of Aquarius, it's well known that Uranus is in danger of becoming Saturn. The young rebel becomes the old despot, and revolutionaries have a tendency to become even more despotic than the authoritarians they claim to replace. as there is something inhuman in the imposition of an ideology. So this is my concern with this warrior fervor at the moment, the anger that is necessary to sweep away corrupt systems can also trigger a similar kind of bloodlust and power hungriness. So there definitely is a need to clear out the old corruption before it festers and kills us all, but at the same time, I think there is a collective trauma here to deal with, and it will take a much more full spectrum consciousness than the current Great Awakening can bring before we fully understand that. So these two titanic archetypes are bound to amplify a lot of tension. And watching what's happening is like being a spectator at a wrestling match performed on the world stage. But to return to Uranus, he operates at a voltage much higher than Saturn, and today's revolution, I think, is about much more subtle frequencies, breaking away from old modes of being, and with an eye on one's inalienable rights. So there's a sense in which Uranus has come to blast away all those ideas that prevent true understanding of human rights. And Saturn may assert power through coercion, but eventually I think that will crumble and collapse. And Uranus wins out as it shines a light on all that corruption that people did not see so clearly before. So there's a cleansing, a purging of the rot at the core of our society and our institutions. But the battle is definitely not over. We've had a whole year of this standoff, and there could be good and evil on both sides of the coin here. The first square was in January 17th, when both Uranus and Saturn were direct, and then the second one was on June 14th, when only Uranus was direct. During August, this square is hovering within, more or less the same degree. It barely moves 1 degree for nearly 2 months. And then Saturn goes direct on October the 11th. But the final square of Uranus and Saturn goes exact on December 24th. So all these issues will come to a head again just in time for Christmas. And then we have to wait until the new year before Uranus goes direct again, January 19th, 2022. So there have been so many other influences as part of this kaleidoscope, and it's better to see it as an unfolding drama that even goes beyond old-style astrology of mundane events into a much more quantum, 5D, multi-layered experience. People are talking of instant manifestation of thoughts, which is Uranian Saturnian, going from 5D to 3D, or just instantly crossing over dimensions. Because everything seems massively speeded up now. But we may no longer need what we thought we needed in the 3D world, all the materialist objects that we accumulated. And that is part of the change that's upon us, I think. The cycle is an old one. It's been cranking away since 1988, when Uranus conjuncted Saturn. And that culminated with the fall of the Berlin Wall of November of 1989, just a year later. So that was really the culmination of that conjunction. It was still fairly close, within 10 degrees. And the wall came down, and that is a very appropriate image and metaphor for what could be happening here. But this cycle rolls on until these big league planets meet again in a conjunction in 2032, when a new Uranus-Saturn cycle begins. But this phase at the moment is in the last quarter square, which is about an assault on beliefs and on the established ideas, so they have to be just melted away. So I'm amazed I got this far without mentioning cryptocurrencies, which are bringing in its whole new monetary system, and it's been happening for a while, but it started to parallel and replace the old system of banking, and now it's proceeding rapidly. And a recent Venus trine Uranus really triggered this as one of the most electrifying conversations I've had in a long time was about cryptocurrencies. So I think this is the time to find out about Bitcoin, Ethereum, Doge, Pirate Chain, Monero, and all the other currencies. Because this points to the fact that Uranus has been in Taurus since 2019 and will stay there until 2026. So it's electrifying downloads to this whole area of banking and material goods, even farming and agriculture. A lot of things are being transformed now, but I think especially our banking systems. And so I think Uranus is working hard in Taurus to crack open the earth and restructure banks, banking methods, money transfer systems, and innovative ways of, they're calling it DeFi, so which is decentralized peer-to-peer finance. And that's not just understanding blockchain, but with lots of investment in new community projects where funding is all from independent sources, which do not allow interference from governments. And I think that is what's inspiring, as well as making money. It's inspiring a lot of people to just do things differently, to use money differently. So we could ask, well, who wins in this game, in this battle? Some say Uranus tops Saturn here because it's further out, but also that it seems to be digging in its heels there, stationary, retrograde, in a fixed sign, in the middle of the sign, making it extra stubborn. But others might say, oh, Saturn is stronger because it's closer to us. But that's because they're both Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius. So that emphasis might come from a more traditional standpoint. And it could clamp down further, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think this, the fact that it's in the middle of a fixed sign means it's not going away, and it's not easily giving way to Saturn, where Saturn would usually have the upper hand. I think Uranus might have the upper hand, and it's about to show who's going to kick most ass. But Uranus can also represent science and technology, which is full of magicians' tricks, and we're all caught in this interconnected web of connections. So we can't break free of it even if we wanted to. And 2021 is this year where Uranus, I think, triumphs, and people around the world actually do get off their sofas and become street rebels. And that's a very challenging process. It's an inexorable cycle going on, influenced obviously by other cycles and other planets and other things. So it's not the only thing. It does tend to dominate, though. And so we have to ask, do we want, say, to be safe alone or to embrace risk in life? Can we have health without freedom? Or to discuss what health means openly? Are we able to do that? And is that the society we want? So we've got all these opportunities to discuss this. So I think this series of squares, it's challenging, but it can open as many doors as it closes. And we need to hang on a bit longer to let it all sink in, to rethink and form new networks and align with those who have a lot more in common with us. And if it splits up society, then perhaps the glue that we imagined was there or just wasn't really there in the first place. That's something to think about. So one final thought would be that you see here the Thoth cards, the devil would refer to Saturn and the Magus would refer to, it's supposed to be Mercury, but at the higher octave, that is Uranus. So we create our own unities in parallel societies. And if the main one becomes oppressive, so this is the genius of Uranus. And Václav Havel, who was a Libran, said that this is what happened in Czechoslovakia. He said it was the countercultures that evolved that eventually killed off the old Soviet Union, because they just subtly, gradually coexisted until it just crumbled from the inside. Hence the name Velvet Revolution. So change doesn't have to be sudden or go on full attack. It can happen slowly, and it doesn't have to read from a monolithic rulebook called Reset. It just can be what we can encourage to be, which is equilibrium, or search for equilibrium between opposing forces. And Uranus invites us to start doing things differently, with eyes open as to which archetype is ruling your thinking. So if it switches from Saturn to Uranus, just be aware of that. You could put on the more modular control, like a dimmer switch. And it could encompass these mutually opposed ideas, but one of them has to shift ground. And I think 2021 is showing that that's happening. And maybe in the Thoth card there, you can see that juggling all possibilities across dimensions is beating chaos at its own game. So thank you for listening. Don't forget that my website is there, www.proteusastrology.co.uk. It will be lovely to hear from you if you wanted to send me an email or give any comments. And I wish you all blessings during this challenging time, and all the best, and see you next time.